Okay, hi, welcome back everybody. And I know what's probably on everyone's mind. First question is like, what about the exam? So, regarding the exam, still reviewing the stats. So, I'm looking at the stats for the questions, seeing if there's something like maybe a question that somehow was too difficult. I might consider that, but also seeing something like sometimes when things upload, sometimes things get kind of funky. So, I see any sort of statistical anomaly, I always review it. And I'll have the scores posted by the end of this week. If you can already see your, I don't know. Top hat is sometimes it depend. I think you have to. Someone has to be the last one to take the exam, and then when they're done, then you can see your raw score. So if you took the top hat version, it just tells you how many questions you got right. And again, if you forgot how many points each question was, so there's like just multiply that raw score by 40, and that's your preliminary score. Again, I'm still looking and reviewing at the stats of the questions, and I know it seems so. Full disclosure, I'm working two positions here at the med school, so what happened is that like I didn't really get to work on the stats this semester because today was the first day of the new unit for the first year med students. And so this is why sometimes like there will be times where I'll try to broadcast whenever I can, but sometimes, like especially when the med students have an exam or something that everyone has to attend, including me as one of the course directors, then I will pre-record. But I always let you know in advance when I'm pre-recording a lecture. And this is a good time to review the Laulima site. So again, if you look at the Laulima site and go right here, and let's open up the browser. Yeah, let's go to the browser. Yeah, so again, if you ever wonder about the calendar and the exam dates, remember you have your Phil 1-for-1 calendar. It's right here in the app right here, and you can see the agenda. And if I do have a pre-recorded lecture, I will let you know. So it's always going to be there. And it also has all your exam dates. Like, I can't believe people are still asking when the next exam is, because this hasn't changed at all. But when I have something that conflicts, I will have a pre-recorded lecture. But I will try to deliver as many live lectures as possible, because again, I look forward to it too. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, here's another thing. Like, this is my schedule pretty much from this point on in the semester. Like, it's like from 8 through 4, it's pretty much like that. I'm pretty much went from teaching mostly 1-for-1, and then now it's like I have like 3 other classes I'm in charge of right now. So yeah, this is kind of like what my schedule looks like. This was my schedule last week, and this is my schedule for the rest of the semester. So if it takes me a little longer, again, just feel free to send another, if it's been more than a day, an email reminder is always appreciated. But again, I'll try to keep on top of things as much as possible. But yeah, it's going to be pretty intense for me from this point on in the semester. Okay. All right, so let's get on with things. And let's see. In exam reviews, those will be during office hours, and when someone's reviewing an exam, and I'll probably keep you in the waiting room. So, that's another thing to bring up. So, if you want to book an individual appointment, right here, so where it says make an appointment, this is where you can book an appointment to do an exam review. So that's what we have here. And okay, there's no availability this week, but next week, so you can see, that's not right. I don't usually do it. Tuesday, yeah. Tuesday is not too bad. But yeah, there more times will pop up here, but that's where appointments will appear. I have to update things because now things have changed now that the med students have started their cardiopulmonary unit. But yeah, if making exam review appointments, it'll be during this time. Okay, so alright, so we're done with exam 1. And if you haven't taken exam 1, and if you had to do a makeup exam, this is the makeup exam week. You have to do it this week. If you can't do it this week, you need documentation. Otherwise, if this week passes, you don't let me know what day you're going to take your makeup exam, then I'm not going to chase you down because I'm not going to say you take the exam this day, and they're like, I can't do it that day. So you have to let me know when you're going to take your makeup exam, and also read the makeup exam rules. Okay, so exam 2. Now, pretty much it's orthopedics for exam 2. It's all the skeletal and muscular system. So there's more anatomies and more pictures. So you'll have to look at the pictures in the book. And I'll have both the Martini and the OpenStax version, because the OpenStax version is a little cartoony and sometimes it's a little hard to see what's going on. And Martini has more, I'm not mandating that everyone buys the Martini version of the book, but it tends to have better defined and more anatomically correct things, and also more angles of muscles and body positions. I think, again, OpenStax is free, but at the same time, that's the quality you get. Okay. And the thing is it all memorization? Is it all identifying and labeling things? No. The thing is that there's also the tissue and cell levels. And in general, if you've had really good previous teachers or biology teachers, they might be taught you well on the cell part. But I notice on average the cell, and especially the physiology parts, where you have to apply things and know how things work, rather than just look at, okay, what bone is this? What muscle is this? But actually knowing how to apply things and predict how things will move, that is a little more difficult, and those tend to be the harder questions on exam 2. And again, this is I'm not mandatory, but this is a classic way, and I did mention this at the beginning of the semester, but anatomy coloring books, if you're going to try to buy this and maybe in the last week of this month and cram it, it doesn't really work that well. So with these coloring books, these are the two I like the best. This is the OG. This is the one that's probably your parents or sometimes maybe even grandparents used. But I like it because it's very detailed, and also these people aren't a publisher. It's actually two authors. One is a anatomist, one's an artist. But Princeton, again, is I think very clear, because sometimes this is a little too detailed, but Princeton tends to be on the cartoony side. But I think it's a really good starting out one, because it's almost everything's pretty clearly labeled and hard to, it's just very accessible. I think I'll say it that way. But again, it can be a little not like real life. Okay, so connective tissues. So we are still going to talk about connective tissue, and there's an important type of connective tissues, or two types we didn't get to talk about. So we did mention connective tissues in chapter 4, but so connective tissue proper, we did cover that on the previous chapter 4, and the fluid connective tissue and supportive connective tissue. So we didn't really get to cover fluid connective tissue or supportive connective tissue. Fluid connective tissues like blood and lymph we'll cover more in detail next semester during PHYL 142. But supportive connective tissues, this is what we are going to cover for Unit 2. Alright, so let's go to top hat real quick. You're like, oh no, top hat again. But yeah, again, everything on top hat is let me switch to that. Alright, so let's go to top hat. And again, join code up there. Actually, that's not the one I wanted to do. Wait, sorry, let me go back. Stop. Let's go, is it presenting my stuff out of order? Okay, this is the one I want to do. Where is it? Yeah, which kind of top hat? Ah, here we go. So which of these are connective tissues? And you can select multiple. It might be one, it might be multiple. And which do I recommend more? I think it's the amount of detail. If you're going on to more advanced, your KRS major, or if you're going to physical therapy, or if you're going to medicine, you might want to get the Kaplan and Elson one. But I think if you're starting from zero and anatomy proves a little challenging for you, I think the Princeton one is easier. Like, they both have their strengths or weakness. Like, if I had to recommend one for high school level, I would actually recommend the Princeton version. Okay, so what do we have here? So what are the responses? So a majority, like, again, it's like you can select multiple. So it seems like most people said that blood is a connective tissue, bone is a connective tissue, cartilage. Not so much people said that epidermis glands and smooth muscle are. And what's the correct answers? So yeah, the first three are correct. So blood is a fluid connective tissue, bone and cartilage are supportive connective tissues. The epidermis is epithelium. So again, stratified squamous epithelium. Glands are technically a type of epithelium, so they secrete things, but they're not connective tissue. And smooth muscle is muscle. So again, remember the four main categories are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So yes, the first three are correct. And let's see, is there another question? Oh, so that's what we have here. Okay, so supportive connective tissues. So what we have with that is that. Okay, so supportive connective tissues, these are the ones that form structure. So they're there to support, because a lot of things on your body are squishy, like your internal organs. They have some durability, but by themselves, can your organs and muscles, without any bones or cartilage, keep yourself upright? No, they need something kind of firm and solid to attach to. So cartilage and bone are the two main types of supportive connective tissues in your body. So cartilage, it has a ground substance, a gel type, and bone, instead of being gel type, so even though you might be like, wait, your bones are the same category as your tendons? Well, instead of their matrix being like mostly collagen fibers and ground substance, it's a calcified ground substance. So it actually has minerals instead of just a gel type ground substance. And bones, these form the strong anchor. So yeah, even though they're very hard, this is why they're supportive. Supportive connective tissues are some of the hardest and most durable tissues in your body. And why? Because again, if you were just organs and muscles with no bone, you would pretty much, like, what would hold your body up? What would form a scaffold and structure to house all the organs and anchor all the muscles when they move around? You'd be like a little blob that kind of constricts and squishes around without any bones in your body. Whereas cartilage, so even though it's not calcified, it is very durable. So things like shock absorption. So it's very durable, but the gel type is kind of like, if you have had those shoes with the gel cushions, it's kind of like the natural version in your body. But depending on type, there's actually subtypes of cartilage, and it's also there to protect. So the thing is that these are to not only for structure, but also the protection of the squishier, softer, more prone to trauma types of tissues and organs in your body. Now, cartilage is a connective tissue, more specifically a supportive connective tissue. And why is it connective tissue? It has specialized cells. So it does have cells, and it has that matrix or extracellular matrix. And again, when you have the cells in ECM, that's when you get a connective tissue. So even though connective tissues aren't arranged like epithelia, they don't contract like muscles, they don't propagate electrochemical signals like nervous tissue. So I like to think of it this way, another analogy. So what we have here, different medical professionals. So here we have some nurses and maybe a physician among them, or maybe an occupational therapist. But they all have different jobs, they're all living. And the extracellular matrix they work in is a hospital. So the hospital, these beds, these instruments, these walls, these air conditioners, these lights, is the building itself living? The building itself is not living, but these living things that are all have their specialty, they work within this structure and use this structure to carry out their functions. So connective tissue is not just about the cells. The cells are important, but the surrounding matrix and the composition of the matrix are also there to help the cells carry out their functions and the overall structure and overall function of the tissue or organ that they're found in. So what are the cells and extracellular matrix of cartilage? Well, the thing is that cartilage cells, and this is a very important medical term. So if you're going to medicine, pharmacology, nursing, you should know this root word. So when you see that root word, think cartilage. That is the root word for that. So remember, sites or cyte, C-Y-T-E, is another root word meaning cell. So what happens when you have the root word for cartilage, chondro, and add them to cyte? You have a cartilage cell. So that's the term for chondrocyte, for cartilage cells. So these chondrocytes, these are the ones that secrete the matrix, the cartilage that, again, remember the matrix itself is not living, but it's very important in carrying out the overall function of that tissue. And let's go to our next top hat question. So extracellular matrix, what is a matrix? A little review here. So you can select multiple answers here. Okay, let's see what people said. So most of you said ground substance and protein fibers, stem cells and trapped gases. A minority of few people said that. Yeah, and the first two are correct. So a matrix is made out of that gel. But in terms of bone, it's calcified ground substance and protein fibers. The cells, again, the matrix itself is not living. The cells in a connective tissue, they make matrix, but they aren't the matrix themselves. They make this, and then trapped gases, that's a tolling. Yeah, there might be gases in the matrix, but it's not considered part of the extracellular matrix itself. All right. Okay, so back to the extracellular matrix and talking about things like that. Okay, so remember, solid protein fibers, these kind of, at least if it's not a fluid connective tissue, it is some sort of solid fiber. And then we have the fluid ground substance, and again, this is the stuff that kind of helps to hold fill the gaps and hold the matrix together. And then you have that extracellular matrix, or sometimes just called matrix. Now with cartilage, there are multiple subtypes of cartilage. The three main categories are hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. And they all have similar compositions, but different proportions of these different types of ground substances and fibers. And I'll go over them really briefly. So again, cartilage extracellular matrix, remember that root word chondro. So what they do is these chondrocytes, they secrete cartilage matrix. And the fibers, so what are the solid fibers? So the main solid fibers you find in cartilage are collagen and elastin fibers. So again, collagen stronger than elastin, but not that elastin is a pushover. But elastin does stretch, but collagen, like fiber for fiber, is probably one of the strongest fibers in the body. And then what we have here are, we have the solid fibers, but what about the ground substance? So major component, there are many different types of molecules that make up the ground substance of cartilage, but major type that you find in all types of cartilage are chondroitin sulfates. And you don't have to know the exact structure of them, but they are a type of polysaccharide, and they help to form the gel-like water-retaining properties of cartilage. And then proteoglycans you also find. So again, proteoglycans, they're part protein. They also have sugars attached. Remember that glyco meaning sugar. And then what we have with the different types. So again, three main categories of cartilage. We have the hyaline cartilage, elastic, and the fibrocartilage, sometimes called fibrous cartilage. Now, what are the protein fibers? In hyaline cartilage, you have a lot of collagen. You do have some elastin, but the main protein fiber in the matrix of hyaline cartilage is collagen. And then elastic cartilage, it's not a surprise that elastin fibers are more of the dominant protein fiber type in elastic cartilage. So that's the difference between hyaline and elastic. And then fibrocartilage, they have a very high collagen concentration, so not too much elastin, and even more like in terms of like density and for like per unit volume or pound for pound, fibrocartilage is going to have a higher collagen content than hyaline cartilage. And remember, collagen is that very strong protein fiber. So the ground substance you'll find in hyaline cartilage, chondroitin sulfates, that special type of carbohydrates, these saccharides. And then we have these hyaluronic acid. That's actually found in a lot, this is where we get hyaline cartilage from. It has this chemical called hyaluronic acid. So don't worry about knowing the exact structure for at this level. Maybe if you take advanced biochemistry or higher level A&P, they might go more about that structure, but at this point, don't worry too much. And proteoglycans, do you have to memorize all the type of proteoglycans you find in hyaline cartilage? No, just know that they are there, and also remember proteoglycans are very important in kind of making ground substance more jelly-like and thicker. Now elastic cartilage is very similar, so both of them have ground substance, but again, hyaline cartilage is predominantly collagen in terms of the fibers. Elastic cartilage is more elastin fibers. Whereas fibrocartilage, it's very, very tough and very, very strong. And you find a lot of the fibrocartilage in certain parts of your body, like linking the vertebrae in your vertebral column. And so what they are more on the solid side, but less on the gel-like side. So fibrocartilage is the strongest type in terms of like strength and dealing with like forces and tensile forces, but it's also very inflexible compared to the other two. So elastic fiber cartilage is going to be the most flexible because it has more elastin. Hyaline somewhere in between, and fibrocartilage is typically called the strongest cartilage in the body because it has a lot of those solid protein fibers, not too much ground substance. And this is what cartilage looks like. So we have all these cells here. So notice that these little cells, you can see there are nuclei in the stain. And this is the hyaline cartilage you find lining your respiratory tract. And this is from another, actually it's, I think from this Xenopus, that's a frog, actually a frog species, not a human one we're seeing here. But I think it's really cool because it shows that these cartilage, you have all this light blue stuff, that's the hyaline cartilage itself. But you also have all these chondrocytes occupying these little pukas, these little holes and little bubbles you find in hyaline cartilage. So the interesting thing about the cartilage structure is that it's avascular. So when you see that prefix av, that means without. So this is what vascular meaning it has. If you have something that's vascular, it refers to it having blood vessels, but if it's avascular, that means there's no blood vessels. So what we have here, we actually see some blood vessels, I assume, in this surrounding connective tissue, but within the light blue cartilage itself, you don't see blood vessels. So what actually has to happen, like for nutrients and oxygen, it has to diffuse through this cartilage. It's also aneural. It's hard to see in this image right here, but there are no nerve endings. Because there's no blood vessels, and you'll find out later on in the semester that nerves, they eat up a lot of energy because they require a lot of ATP. To make a lot of ATP efficiently, you need oxygen and nutrients. So if you don't have blood vessels, you're not going to have the supplies to sustain a lot of these nerves. So what we also have is a perichondrium, and you can see this in this kind of like, it's a connective tissue that surrounds it. So there is actually that's a review, another useful prefix. Peri tends to mean around something. So it's actually a layer of connective tissue that surrounds cartilage when you have a perichondrium. And so what we have here, now notice in that previous slide you saw that these chondrocytes that were in little bubbles, these little pockets, and these are called, singular lacuna, plural lacunae, and what they are little chambers containing individual cells. So there are pockets in the matrix that house a little cell or maybe dividing cells in each. And this is how cartilage grows. So what we have here is a single chondrocyte inside that little pocket in the matrix. And when it divides, what's cool is that when it undergoes mitosis, these new daughter cells, they start building more and more matrix. And what happens when they build layer of layer matrix, they can only really build more matrix inside of this little pocket. But as they build more and more of these layers, they start to build more distance between them. like if you've ever had a roommate, or if you're in one of the Haleoluhat, or actually I wonder if they still have, I don't know if it's still a single occupancy, but in the before times when you would have like sometimes two people in the same bedroom, I mean, it's not like I didn't get along with my roommates, but sometimes like if you have like a line, like this is my side of the room, this is your side of the room, and what happens when like, okay, you're putting your books on your side, and then you start pushing yourself, like forming a barrier of whatever your stuff between you and your roommate, and you notice your chairs are starting to push away from each other because you have too much stuff building up between you. Well, that's kind of how what happens with two daughter cells of a chondrocyte. As they build up more cartilage, they start to drift apart, not because they're actually moving, but because they're building more and more of that cartilage matrix between them. So to animate this is a cartilage matrix, and here's a little lacuna, or lacunae actually, with multiple of these. And we're going to show are little chondrocytes. And within these chondrocytes, what happens if you have two chondrocytes in the same lacuna? So it undergoes mitosis, and what happens is that they start to build new matrix. So as they secrete more cartilage matrix, they form this little layer, and as they form this like new layer of cartilage matrix, if they keep on building these new layers, I'm showing the light green over here, well, you're going to build more and more of that cartilage matrix, and notice that they're only building that matrix in their surrounding pocket. But if you keep on building up that cartilage, notice that they're not actually moving through this cartilage. Just by building the layers, they're building more distance between each other. So this is how these chondrocytes are able to divide, but also build up new matrix and also migrate to different pockets throughout the matrix of a cartilage. So again, the three main types. You definitely should know the three, and general properties. Am I going to ask which one has more chondroitin sulfate? Well, at least fibrocartilage, you would know like, okay, it has the least ground substance, so I have the least chondroitin sulfate. But I'm going to ask you, how much percentage of the matrix or the ground substance of hyaline cartilage is chondroitin sulfate? I think that's more like, that's more trivia, but you should know it's there. Just know general compositions, especially in that previous table. Okay, so with hyaline cartilage, so what the cool thing about hyaline cartilage, so it has collagen, mostly collagen, and also some ground substance with like chondroitin sulfates and proteoglycans and hyaluronic acid. So the cool thing about hyaline cartilage, this is what you find connecting your sternum and your ribs. So it's not all bone all the way. So the cool thing is that your bones, they are flexible to an extent, but cartilage is more flexible. So when your rib cage is always moving. When you're breathing in and out, your rib cage is moving. So it makes sense that you need a little flexibility. So with the hyaline cartilage that connects your sternum to your ribs, it allows your rib cage and sternum to move, but it also it's not a flimsy barrier. It's actually very sturdy, but it's flexible. You also find hyaline cartilage between what we call the sites of articulation between bones. In other words, articulation is when two bones touch. And the cool thing about this hyaline cartilage is like if your bones didn't have this cartilage, they would just grind up against each other. This hyaline cartilage helps to form a smoother surface that helps to protect the ends of bones, but also helps to prevent them from rubbing up against each other and damaging the bone tissue. So you find them a lot in your joint, not only in your rib cage, but also your joints and rib tips, and even surrounding your trachea, or the layman terms, like if you've heard the term windpipe, that's the trachea. So you find hyaline cartilage, so it's flexible but strong. Now elastic cartilage, you can feel it right here. So just feel your ear. And can you bend your ear? Yeah, most likely you can bend your ear. And it is pretty tough. Like, if you watch those MMA fights, maybe somebody might lose part of their cartilage. But the elastic cartilage, even though it is still cartilage, it's maybe not as strong as the cartilage in your ribs and in your joints, but it is a type of cartilage. So it's supportive but flexible. But this is, again, of the three types of cartilage, elastic fibers are strong, but not as strong as collagen. So this is like, it's not saying elastic cartilage is weak, but of the three types, it is the general like weakest of the three. But again, this is kind of traded off. What you find out with the skeletal system is that, and joints, is that the more flexible something is, the less strength it has to all these forces and tears. Whereas if it's more flexible, it's more prone to that mechanical damage. But again, it's not that it's like weak sauce until it tears as easy as like wet tissue paper. It's just like comparatively, it's the weakest. And where can you find it? Well, you can find it in the external ear and the epiglottis. We'll cover more about the epiglottis when we talk about the digestive system and respiratory system next semester. But the epiglottis is basically a flap of cartilage that prevents, like when you're swallowing, or have you ever drank water and then it goes down the wrong pipe, so to say, and then it triggers that coughing reflex. You're like, and everyone's like, "Oh, are you okay? Do you have the coronavirus?" And you're like, "No, I just drank and it went down the wrong pipe." Well, the epiglottis is very important in making sure that the stuff you drink and eat don't end up in your respiratory system instead of in your digestive system. But yeah, more details about that next semester. Now, fibrocartilage, where do you find that? Specific sites in your body, especially the parts that need to support a lot of weight or are subject to a lot of stresses. So here we have your vertebrae, which you'll learn about. Well, if you're taking the lab, you already know about your vertebrae, but if you're just taking the lecture, you'll find about them very, very, very soon. So what they have is, again, all connective tissue connective tissues have a matrix, and all matrices have protein fibers and ground substance. This is the one that is heavy on the protein fibers and not too much ground substance. So they have a high collagen content, so it's like all of these strong protein fibers connecting this cartilage. So it's very strong, but limits movement. So this is something we see with all our joints. Like you're able to like take your shoulder and kind of roll it around and trace out circles with your arm, but again, can you do that? Like if you're really flexible and a gymnast, you can move around your vertebrae like that. But yeah, this is why our spinal column, unless you're really trained or you do a lot of yoga, is not going to be as flexible as your other joints. And you also find fibrocartilage in this part we call the pubic symphysis, and these are your two coxal bones or hip bones, and these join the left and right part, the anterior part of your hip bones together. So it prevents bone-to-bone contact because, again, you're always your spinal column, your vertebral column is holding a lot of weight and supporting a lot of weight. So if you had no cartilage, you wouldn't have anything preventing these bones from grinding up against each other and being worn down. So it forms also like a little shock cut and cushioning as well. So you also find them in your knee joints, which endure a lot of your weight of your body. And so whenever you need a type of cartilage, but you want it even stronger than your typical type of hyaline cartilage, this is where we find it in your body. So these points of high stress. Okay, so we talked about cartilage, and let's talk about bone. But to review, let's review this. Okay, next top hat question. So to review, let's see who was paying attention. What type of cells secrete cartilage matrix? Okay, let's see what everyone said. So most of you said chondrocytes, and yes, that magical root word chondro meaning cartilage. Next question. So chondrocytes are found in small pockets of cartilage called, and this is fill in the blank. Anytime you get to cough, people get sus. I know. Sneeze, it's like, oh shoot, no, seriously, I have allergies. But I mean, better people take it seriously than not. I'm glad numbers are going down locally. Okay, let's see. So responses. Yep, so lacunae or lacuna, either one I'll accept. So this is just a singular, this is plural. But yeah, those pockets are called lacuna. So it kind of like rhymes with like hakuna, right? Like hakuna matata. Nah. I'm not going to start singing. You don't want to hear that. Okay, back to our presentation. So we talked about one type of, so this is why I kind of like, even though cartilage is actually covered more in depth in chapter 4 of both textbooks, I think they go hand in hand with bone tissue. That's why I kind of put it off, and so that you would have less to study on exam 1. But now you have to study for exam 2, but of course cartilage is important. Okay, so bone tissue. Okay, so now let's talk about the other supportive tissue. So chondro refers to cartilage, but osteo, or sometimes just os, and this is Latin. Like if you see Grey's Anatomy, they might just say os something something in Latin. That's saying the bone, that whatever bone they're referring to. And so when we have osteology, so just like we have with like histology is a study of tissues, osteology is the study of bones, and if you're taking the lab, that's what you've been doing for the past 2-3 weeks, and now you're going to take the exam for it. So what is osseous tissue? That's just a more technical term for bone tissue or your bones. So again, that os or osteo means related to bones. So when you have an osteocyte, remember cyte refers, C-Y-T-E refers to cells. So your bone cells collectively are osteocytes. And bone is a connective tissue. It's not the same as like your tendons and your ligaments and your areolar tissue and adipose tissue, but it is a type of connective tissue. So again, does it have specialized cells? Yes, it does. Does it have a matrix? Yes, it does. And are they all found together in that same tissue? Yes, it does. So what are the cells of extracellular matrix and bone? Well, the thing is that matrix, you need that, unless it's a fluid connective tissue, a matrix is going to have solid protein fibers and it's going to have a ground substance. And these two together make a matrix. So what we have with the bone, so I'm just going to show an animation. With cartilage, with bone, what you have, the ground substance is what we call bone mineral. And primary component of bone mineral is calcium salts and especially a type called calcium phosphate. Now, do I want you to know the exact percentages of all the calcium ions and phosphate and other minerals in bone? Well, just know that calcium phosphate is a major component of it, but I'm not going to ask you, okay, is it 20%, is it 30%, is it 40%? I think that's a little, maybe not so much high yield, but just know that this is why calcium is super important for your bone density, strength, and health. But the thing is that this is not just bone mineral, it's not just solid bone and calcium. What you actually have are collagen fibers woven throughout your bones. So this is why bones are a little flexible. Like if you're a meat eater and you've had like a chicken bone, and you notice that the chicken bones their bones are hard, but they do flex a bit. And then what we have is that basically your bone mineral or your bone matrix is kind of like this layers of collagen wrapped them up and it's kind of like crisscrossing against each other. So they're not all in the same direction. They actually form this weaving, or if you've seen like carbon fiber when it's kind of like actually woven together, and then they might apply a resin to help hold it together. It's kind of like that. So, or if you was it fiberglass, or like if you've had a fiberglass surfboard or snowboard, they do a similar process. They have these fibers and they add kind of like some sort of resin to kind of hold it to get these fibers together, and they form a very strong structure. So your bones are kind of like that, very strong fibers held by a very strong glue. Is the meniscus of the knee fibrocartilage? Yes, it is. It's not bone, it's a fibrocartilage. So that's the other thing about fibrocartilage. It's not just about being strong, it's also sometimes used for shock absorption. So in the knee as well as your vertebrae as well. Okay, so the extracellular matrix. So what we have with the bone tissue is that the solid fibers, collagen, some elasticity, but the collagen is the main one. And then what we have with the ground substance is our calcium salts. And then what we have here is the bone extracellular matrix. So yeah, we're talking about the bone matrix itself. Okay, next top hat questions. And this is like, so based on what we said in our definitions of connective tissue and matrix, true or false? The bones in your body are a living tissue. Okay, let's see what people said. So 82 of you said true, more of you, the majority said true, some people said false. And yes, the bones in your body are living. So this is where you see a common misconception, like, oh, bone isn't living tissue because like when we die, what's left over? So remember, bone is a connective tissue, and what do all connective tissues have in common? They have specialized cells, which are living. They have a matrix, which is not living, and this forms a connective tissue. So what are cells of bone tissues? So there are many types of bone tissues. Collectively, there's osteocytes, but bone cells, there are 4 main types of bone cells, and cells are living. So the bones in your body are living tissue. So again, just because we leave behind the matrix of our bone, all that calcium phosphate and the structure of bones, what happens is like the cells do die after these cells that were in our bone, and when we die, we leave our bones, they're not there anymore. So we just leave our matrix behind. But the bones in your body right now, they are living because they have all these types of living bone cells in your bone tissue. And this is why if you've ever had like a traumatic injury or some sort of infection or something that damaged bone tissue can die, because if you damage the blood vessels that supply all these cells, that can cause these cells to die off and become necrotic, and that can cause the surrounding matrix to be compromised, maybe predispose you to infections or eating away at the matrix of the bone tissue. So bones in your body are living tissues. Yep, so cells are living and ECM is non-living, yes, because again, extracellular matrix, that's the stuff outside of the cells, so these are molecules that are still important, but since they aren't cells themselves, they're not living. So what we have, the main 4 categories of bone cells are osteogenic cells, osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. Now, this is where it can get very confusing because they all start with osteo, they're all cells. So what you have to really pay attention to is the second half of all of these bone cell types. So what are osteoblasts? Well, this is like showing a cross-section of bone, and here we have bone matrix over here. So what osteoblasts is, they secrete this substance called osteoid. So osteoid is not fully formed bone yet, but what happens is that as they secrete this substance called osteoid, is that these blood vessels that are found throughout your bones. So again, this is another reason why your bone is living tissue, because it has all these cells. Your bones, while they're in your body, they have your blood vessels that supply them with nutrients, and they also have blood vessels called veins that carry away waste and carbon dioxide from these cells. So these osteoblasts, they build a substance called osteoid, and blood vessels carry calcium salts and all the parts that make up bone mineral. And what happens is that this osteoid absorbs all those calcium ions, the phosphate, and other minerals found in bone matrix. and then it starts to harden it. So osteoid is kind of a jelly-like substance, but actually needs to deposit some of these minerals in order to actually calcify and harden. So this is a nice mnemonic I learned from one of my predecessors. Osteoblasts build. So they build osteoid, which is eventually solidifies into bone matrix. Now osteocytes, now it's interesting because osteoblasts, they're actually found on the periphery, they have room to grow. But the interesting thing is, like, what's the difference between an osteoblast and an osteocyte? Well, remember that whole thing about like how a fibroblast is an immature fibrocyte? Osteocytes are so osteoblasts are immature, osteocytes are more mature. But what we notice in this picture right here is that notice that osteocyte is surrounded by bone matrix. So again, blasts are immature and cytes are mature. So what happens when a bone, well, look at it, it's trapped by matrix. Can it really travel anywhere and build more and more osteoid? Well, if it built more osteoid, it would be trapping itself even more. So once an osteoblast gets surrounded by matrix, it can develop into an osteocyte. And the whole purpose of an osteocyte in general is to maintain the surrounding matrix. So they're not really building new osteoid in matrix. They're more about maintenance. So remember how like fibroblasts and fibroblasts secrete new collagen, they secrete new matrix, and fibrocytes, they're more about maintenance of that matrix. Similar thing happens with osteocytes and osteoblasts. Osteocytes are more about maintenance, osteoblasts are more about building. So again, fibroblast builds, fibrocytes maintain, osteoblast builds, osteocytes maintain. That's one way that you can think about it. Now, osteogenic cells. Now, these are different from osteoblasts. So what happens is that osteogenic cells are the stem cells of bone tissue. So remember, stem cells, the two classic properties of stem cells is one, they can divide and generate more stem cells, and two is differentiation, meaning that they can become other types of cells. So osteogenic cells, so remember that root word genesis or generate, that means generate or create something. So osteogenic cells, they generate osteoblasts and osteocytes. Not all four, but they do generate osteoblasts and osteocytes. So osteogenic cells are stem cells, meaning that they can undergo mitosis and generate more of that same type of cell. So what we have here is the osteogenic cell doing this regeneration and generating more osteogenic cells. But now at this point, an osteogenic cell can not only regenerate itself, but also differentiate. So here we have an osteogenic cell becoming an osteoblast. And once the osteoblast builds enough matrix that's totally surrounded by bone matrix, it now becomes an osteocyte. So what we have is differentiation not just in one step, but multiple steps to finally become a full osteocyte. So again, osteogenic cells, now can osteoblasts divide and undergo mitosis? No, they can't. And neither can these osteocytes because they lose the ability to do that, and there's nowhere for them to really undergo mitosis as well. So how do you generate more osteoblasts and osteocytes? Differentiate another osteogenic cell. So this is why these are the stem cells. You have to differentiate. Once they differentiate and become specialized, they lose the ability to reproduce. But as long as you have these osteogenic cells that can generate more osteogenic cells that can become other type of bone cells, you still have a supply of these bone cells. So again, bone cell differentiation, and so again, stem cells, renewal and regeneration, and differentiation. So osteogenic cells can do both. So what's the difference between osteoblasts? And so again, they remember osteoblasts, they build osteoid, which calcifies and hardens to form bone matrix. So osteoblasts build. Now, you have another type of cell called osteoclasts. Now again, don't get this confused with osteocytes. Those are two different things. Now the osteoclasts are very interesting because notice that while I'm showing this cartoon, they actually have multiple nuclei. And the cool thing is that osteoclasts are actually a special type of macrophage. And remember, macrophage, that to break down that word, it means a big eater. So macrophages, in terms of bone cells, well, the thing is that, typical in general, macrophages eat something. Either be a bacterium, a dead cell, cellular debris, But osteoclasts are actually special macrophages. But instead of just eating pathogens and other cells, what they do, what you find with osteoclasts is that here we have, in this osteoclast, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 nuclei that are visible. So they actually have multiple nuclei. So what they do is actually, here we have, here we have a damaged bone. So what an osteoclast does, so when you have a damaged bone, thing is that once you damage a bone and have these little cracks and fissures, it's kind of hard, it makes the whole bone weak, this area of it weak. So do you just want to keep this around, or do you want to repair it? Well, are you just going to build more bone on top of a structure or build upon a structure that's already weakened to begin with? This is where these osteoclasts come in handy. So again, osteoclasts are actually formed from the fusion of multiple macrophage-like cells. So macrophages form together, and if you've seen Dragon Ball, and then they start to fuse together and form a new person, well, that's what happens with the macrophage. They actually form, like the osteoclasts are multiple macrophages that fuse together. This is why they have multiple nuclei. So it's like a big eater. And what it does is actually dissolve, instead of eating other cells and pathogens, it actually dissolves the matrix. So when it dissolves the matrix, it also dissolves that damaged bone. So what do you do here? You have these osteoclasts broke down that damaged bone, but are you going to just leave it thin like that? And this is where it has to pair up with these osteoblasts. These osteoblasts are going to build new osteoid to form that, and since this osteoid is filling in the gaps and now hardening and forming new strong matrix, it's going to secrete this thing called bone alkaline phosphatase. So this is a cool thing. It's like ACE is remember ASE means an enzyme. So what happens is these osteoblasts, they build osteoid, they also secrete this enzyme called BAP, or bone alkaline phosphatase, and it causes the osteoid to mineralize. And now you have new, strong, undamaged bone matrix. So now this bone is stronger than before, even though it was damaged previously. Yep, so yeah, you can use the reference that often. Let's see the chat. Since osteocytes secrete things and tend to make layers, they're still connective tissue because it's bone. And remember, epithelial tissue has to be a layer of something, and these osteocytes, so they don't quite form a layer. They're trapped by all these matrix. They're found within layers, but they don't form a full sheet themselves. And then they also secrete a matrix, which is also like epithelial tissues. They can secrete things, but those are glandular secretions. They don't secrete a matrix like connective tissue. Can we use the blast as immature and grows to mature form? Yeah, that's the way I think of it. If it works for you, great. Stick bug. That's funny. That's a great one. I should put a reference next time. All right, so why rebuild bone matrix? Again, why do you have to do the steps? Why not just build upon that damaged bone matrix? If your parents like watching like HGTV, like my parents love that stuff, but what happens, like here we have a wall that's damaged with all this water and probably black mold. Now, if you want to renovate, are you just going to build upon this nasty looking rotting drywall, or do you want to tear it down and have something that's totally new, totally fresh? Yeah, you're probably not. Or if you're like into carpentry, are you going to build furniture upon rotted, waterlogged wood, or do you want to get rid of that, anything that's damaged, and replace it with new, fresh, strong wood? So bone matrix is very similar. You don't want to build upon damaged materials, because if one is already kind of damaged, and it doesn't make sense because that compromises the structure of the whole thing, even if you add new layers upon it. So this is why you need osteoclasts. Osteoclasts get rid of damaged material. So another way, mnemonic is osteoclasts crush, and then osteoblasts build. So this is one of my favorite mnemonics. Osteoclasts crush, osteoblasts build. Osteoclasts crush, osteoblasts build. Say it in your head and say it repeatedly until you get it. So that's the big difference between osteoclasts and osteoblasts, is that clasts crush down damaged bone material, or the other thing is that when they crush that bone matrix, they actually release calcium ions into the surrounding extracellular fluid. So the cool thing about osteoclasts is not only do they crush damaged bone, but they also increase the calcium content in your body, because they're actually taking the calcium from bone and releasing it to your bloodstream. So this is another cool way your body is able to adjust the levels of calcium in your body. All right. So bone remodeling, I like to think of it. So are osteoclasts necessarily evil? No. Again, they're there to repair. Osteoclasts are there to get rid of damaged bone, but osteoblasts are there to build. So they're kind of keeping each other in balance. So osteoclasts are there to kind of like get rid of damaged bone and also increase your blood's calcium content, whereas osteoblasts, they're there to build up new bone matrix, repair, thicken, and repair previously digested bone from osteoclasts. And they can also lower your blood content, or they can also deposit excess calcium into your bone. All right, so now it's dropped by 1 point. Yeah, so sometimes you see like if it drops by 1 point, well, I have to look at if it's usually when I look through this stuff, and yeah, I'll have to review the statistics and see why it dropped. Now, does calcium ion salt to get work? Yep. So that's the thing. Like the bone alkaline phosphatase catalyzes and increases the rate of that osteoid mineralizing and hardening as well. And phone game, yeah. So is this example of negative feedback? In terms of negative feedback, well, no, it's more about like a cycle of things, like, or homeostasis that's what we're talking about here. But the thing is, like, if like say, or it's like, what is it? Yeah, I guess it could be a negative feedback in a sense. So say you have low blood calcium and low calcium in your blood. Yeah, in other words, a low concentration of calcium ions in your blood. What that can do is stimulate hormones that tell osteoclasts to increase their activity. So when they increase the activity of osteoclasts, what they do is they digest bone mineral that releases more calcium ions that ends up raising your blood calcium. So yeah, that is a negative feedback. Okay, so that's bone remodeling. Oh, we're definitely over time. So, okay, so see you next week. And yeah, that's why I have a lot of top hat questions. And oof. Because that's the god of nowhere. I swear I don't have the Rona. I tested negative. Okay, but anyway, I don't know what. Maybe it's from talking too much and I need to drink water. But anyway, see you all on Wednesday. Again, if you're wondering about grades, I'm still reviewing things. So nothing is set until I publish it, all right? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's like old. Okay. All right, see you, everyone. See you on Wednesday.